The knock came at exactly 12:07 a.m., sharp and deliberate, slicing through the silence of my small apartment like a blade, and for a moment I lay frozen on the couch, staring at the dark ceiling, wondering if I'd imagined it. Because no one knocks at midnight unless something is wrong, and my life at 32 had already taught me that unexpected sounds usually carried unexpected consequences, especially when you live alone, especially when your life has been reduced to a routine of work, microwave dinners, and quiet nights meant to keep memories at bay. But the knock came again, firmer this time, closer, real, and my heart began to pound as I sat up slowly, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock on the wall, and the rain tapping against the window, my first instinct screaming not to answer, to stay still, to pretend I wasn't home. Yet something about the rhythm of the knock, controlled, almost hesitant, made it impossible to ignore, so I stood, pulled my hoodie tighter around me, and walked toward the door, each step heavier than the last, my hand hovering over the lock as I leaned forward to peer through the peephole. And that's when I saw her, standing there in the dim hallway light like a ghost that had stepped out of a life I had carefully avoided, my neighbor, the 38-year-old woman from across the hall, the one everyone noticed but no one really knew, the one who always smelled faintly of lavender, who wore calm like armor, who nodded, politely but never lingered, and now here she was, hair damp from the rain, eyes red like she'd been crying or hadn't slept in days, wearing a long coat over pajamas as if she'd run out without thinking. And the moment our eyes met through the peephole, she looked up as if she somehow knew I was there, and whispered something I couldn't hear, her lips trembling, my chest tightening with a strange mix of concern and fear as I unlocked the door and opened it just enough to speak, asking if everything was okay. And the words barely left my mouth before she said my name, softly but urgently, which startled me because I'd never told her my name, and she took a step closer, lowering her voice like the walls themselves were listening, saying, "I'm sorry to come this late, but I don't have anyone else." And something in her tone, raw, honest, breaking, made it impossible to shut the door, so I opened it wider, letting the hallway light spill into my living room, noticing how her hands were shaking as she clasped them together, how she kept glancing behind her like she was afraid someone might appear, and when I asked what was wrong, she hesitated for a long moment, swallowing hard before saying, "I need 10 minutes of your time, and if you don't give them to me, my life is going to fall apart tonight." And I should have said no, should have told her to come back in the morning, should have protected my carefully built solitude, but instead I stepped aside and let her in, closing the door behind her with a soft click that sounded far louder than it should have, sealing us inside my quiet, ordinary life just as it was about to be turned upside down. Because once she sat down on the edge of my couch, pressing her palms together like she was praying for courage, and once she looked up at me with eyes full of fear and resolve and said, "There's something you don't know about me, and it involves you," I realized this wasn't just a midnight interruption. This was a moment, the kind that divides life into before and after, and as the rain outside intensified and the clock ticked toward 12:10, she took a deep breath, opened her mouth, and told me the first sentence of a truth I was never supposed to hear. A truth that would make me question everything I believed about coincidence, about kindness, and about how one knock at the wrong or right time can rewrite an entire future. If this story already has you hooked, don't forget to subscribe, because the next chapter reveals a secret that changes everything. She sat there on my couch like time itself had paused around her, the ticking clock suddenly too loud, each second echoing the weight of whatever she was about to say, and when she finally spoke, her voice was steady in a way that only comes after you've already cried all the tears you had left, telling me that 10 years ago, on a night I barely remembered, I had unknowingly stepped into the most important moment of her life, because there was a winter evening, long before she became the quiet, guarded woman across the hall, when she had been standing on a bridge at the edge of the city, convinced that she had reached the end of everything, her career collapsing, her engagement shattered, her family cutting her off for choices she'd made trying to survive. And she said she'd stood there for over an hour watching cars pass, feeling invisible, until a stranger stopped, not to save her dramatically, not to preach, but simply to ask if she was cold. And that stranger had been me, younger, reckless, still believing I mattered to the world, offering her my coffee, my jacket, and 10 minutes of conversation because I was late for nothing important. And as she spoke, fragments of memory came rushing back to me like shards of glass. Rain, streetlights, a woman crying, a conversation I dismissed as insignificant, something I'd done and forgotten because at the time I didn't need saving, and she did, and she told me that those 10 minutes were the reason she stepped away from the edge, the reason she chose to live, the reason she rebuilt herself piece by piece, became someone others admired, someone strong, someone who learned how to stand alone, and my chest tightened as she leaned forward, eyes shining now not with fear but with something deeper, gratitude mixed with urgency, because she said she hadn't knocked tonight to thank me. She knocked because her life was once again balanced on a fragile edge, not of despair, but of responsibility, explaining that she was a foster guardian for a baby girl whose parents had disappeared, a child she had loved for months, planned to adopt, but the system had given her an impossible ultimatum that very day. Prove she had a stable two-parent support environment within 48 hours or lose the child forever. And she laughed bitterly as she said she was 38, unmarried, independent, and suddenly being told that love wasn't enough, that paperwork mattered more than sleepless nights and lullabies. And I felt something shift inside me when she looked straight at me and said, "I remembered you because you once gave me 10 minutes when you didn't have to, and now I'm asking you for the same thing. But this time, it's my turn to be honest." And before I could interrupt, she explained she wasn't asking for romance. Not for lies, not even permanence, just a temporary agreement, a legal appearance, someone willing to stand beside her at a meeting the next morning and say he was part of her support system. Because she had no family left willing to show up, and every friend she trusted lived too far away. And I laughed at first, out of shock, disbelief, fear, because the idea of stepping into someone else's life like that felt insane. But then she stood up, walked to the door, opened it, and said softly, "I won't beg you. I just needed to try." And in that moment I realized something terrifying and beautiful, that my quiet, lonely life wasn't safe, it was small, and that the 10 minutes I'd given years ago had mattered more than anything I'd done since. And I heard myself asking her to sit back down, telling her to explain everything again, slower, and the night stretched forward as we talked until the rain stopped and dawn crept through the curtains. And by morning I found myself standing in a government office holding papers I didn't fully understand, answering questions I never thought I'd hear, watching her hands tremble again, this time as she waited for a decision. And when the caseworker finally nodded and said the arrangement was acceptable, I saw her break down silently, covering her face, shoulders shaking, and something inside me broke open too, because when we walked out into the sunlight together, she thanked me the same way she had 10 years earlier, like I'd given her something priceless. But the truth was I felt like I'd been given everything instead, because over the weeks that followed, temporary became routine, routine became connection, connection became something deeper neither of us named it first, until one quiet evening as the baby slept between us on the couch, she looked at me and said, "Life keeps putting us in each other's path for a reason." And I knew she was right, because that midnight knock didn't just change her life. It saved mine from becoming a story of what could have been, teaching me that sometimes the most unexpected chapters begin when you open a door you were afraid to answer. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you believe in second chances, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel, because the next story might be the one that changes your life too.